Yesterday we were talking about the proper way to wear your Rashi and Rabenu Tam tefillin, if it has to be both at once or one after another. We said yesterday that ideally a person, if he wants to put on both at once, he's going to have to get very small pairs of tefillin, because, you know, even if it a little bit moves from the spot, it's not going to be kasher, or it's very hard to also write it like that. He continues, he says like this, Omnam b'derech klal, generally, yesh lachosh yafsid mitzvah tefillin adei shenichem yachad v'lishlo b'mkoman. Generally, we assume that since it's very difficult, a person who puts on both, it's hard to say that he did it properly. V'kachu b'derech klal etzel rov ha'anashim, unless you're very big, most of the times if you have small arms and whatever, it's gonna be that it's not in the right spot. That's what he says here. B'derech klal. Generally, unless you're one of the people that is, making sure of it. Either they're going to go two down. And he says, even if your tefillin are very small, that you're putting it in the right spot, you have another problem. That again, the parashiot, it's very hard to write the parashiot, because you have to write it in very small compartments. He says that's why he concludes, adif is better. The best thing to do is if you put on the Rabenu Tam, Rashi and Rabenu Tam one after another. But he says the proper procedure for people who put on both at the same time. Mike, of course, knows he's halachot because he puts on both at the same time. So he says the proper, for all the rest of us that don't wear both at the same time, this is the proper way to put on both at the same time. Somebody who puts on both pairs at the same time, he says you pick up both at the same time, and you put them both to your hand at the same time. And he says you put Rabenu Tam closer to the elbow, and the Rashi behind it, meaning Rabenu Tam's towards the bottom, and Rashi's towards the top. But why? He says because Ki ma'alat b'chinat tefillin shel Rabenu Tam gedula mib'chinat tefillin shel Rashi. According to the Mekubalim, they say that the tefillin of Rabenu Tam is more sacred than Rashi. Therefore, they have to be considered. They have to be positioned above Rashi, right? So it's really, since it's closer to the elbow, it's above Rashi, right? After he says you make the bracha, you tighten the strap of Rashi around your arm, and then Rabenu Tam, and then both straps you take at the same time. Rashi covers Rabenu Tam, and you put it around your arm 7 times, right? You're not doing first Rashi, then Rabenu Tam. You're doing both straps at the same time, but the Rashi strap is over the Rabenu Tam strap. Oh wow! Coffee shop. Okay, fine. Starbucks. He says, in order to accomplish this custom, what we usually do is we make the batim of Rabenu Tam a little smaller and the straps a little narrower, right? Because you want the straps to be able to hide the Rabenu Tam. This way you're able to hide it, he says. The tefillin of the Shel Rosh Rashi is placed on the person's head, and the Rabenu Tam is directly behind it, higher on the head. So the tefillin, Rabenu Tam is lower than Rashi, and on the head, it's higher than Rashi. It's more towards the back of your head, and Rashi is towards the front. Also, he says the dalet of Rabenu Tam is in the back of that, above the dalet of Rashi. That's supposed to be both on top of each other. The Rabenu Tam dalet, the not banyer, is slightly above the one of Rashi. He says, likewise, whenever the straps go around your head, right? When the straps hang onto your chest, he says the straps of Rabenu Tam also should be behind Rashi. Basically, we're trying to conceal the Rabenu Tam, it looks like. And he says here, every detail of this formula is significant according to Kabbalah, and therefore it should be followed exactly. The Ben Ish Chai taught that the practice of covering the straps of Rabenu Tam with those of Rashi is hidden by the pasuk. Shemot Tam u'e Yashar. Hide the Tam and see the Yashar. Yashar is Rashi. Yashar is Yud Shin Reish. Yud Shin Reish backwards is Rashi. Unbelievable, wow. Hide the Tam, Rabenu Tam, and reveal the Rashi, the Yashar. Very nice. Tam is simple and Yashar is... The pasuk says in Tilim, Shemot Tam u'e Yashar. You should hide the simple and see the straight, right? But they're doing like a hint off of it. Tam is Rabenu Tam, right? So it's saying hide Rabenu Tam and see Yashar. Yashar backwards is Rashi. Wow. So hide Rabenu Tam and see Rashi. Very nice. I didn't say it again. I'm trying to talk to you. I didn't make it up. Okay, fine. Now let's say he says a person usually puts on Rashi and Rabenu Tam one after another, and one day by mistake he took Rabenu Tam and made the blessing on it. Right? I guess it could happen sometimes if you wake up early in the morning and you go to the left side of the bima instead of the right. So you also put on your Rabenu Tam instead of your Rashi first. He says, and afterwards you realize you made a mistake. And he says, you already started praying with Rabenu Tam, you already had made the blessing. He says, you have to make a bracha on them again. Why? Because your Kriyat Shema and your Tefillah between it was a hefsek. And since he says you were wearing your Rabenu Tam throughout the Tefillah, and therefore, in that situation where you made that mistake, meaning you came in the morning, took your Rabenu Tam, made a bracha and put it on, realized in the middle while you're praying, when you're going to put on your Rashi afterwards, you're going to have to make a blessing again. He says, if immediately you realize you made the blessing, you're putting on Rabenu Tam, and you realize, wait a minute, this is Rabenu Tam, because you could tell the difference. We said yesterday with the hairs, or if you just know from your bag, he says, and you didn't talk yet, right away he says, don't make a blessing on your Rashi, take it off, put on your Rabenu Tam. Why? Because since you didn't speak, you just did actions, we're going to rely on the opinions, you don't have to make the blessing again. Somebody says, let's say a person took out, we know that there's a whole discussion, let's say you took out your tefillin before your talit first. What should you put on, right? The Kubalim say put on your talit, Shulchan Aruch says put on your tefillin, some people they start saying korbanot so they can make a separation in between. What if a person picked up his Rabenu Tam first? Not even picked up, pass over. Let's say a person shouldn't put his Rashi in the back of his Rabenu Tam because now his hand has to go over the Rabenu Tam, right? Let's say a person did that. He either touched or he went over his Rabenu Tam. He says, what do you put on first? Mishnah Berurah says you put on Rabenu Tam first. Why? Because he says that, he says you put on Rashi first. Why? Because he says that Rabenu Tam is not really the genuine mitzvah, so to speak, since the world already accepted the opinion of Rashi. Even if you touch Rabenu Tam, you'll put it back down and you'll pick up Rashi. He says here that it doesn't really follow Mekubalim so much. Why? Because Mekubalim say both tefillin are essential. They're both the kosher tefillin you have to put on, and therefore he says that it comes out you're going to have to put on Rabenu Tam first. According to Mekubalim, you're going to have to put on Rabenu Tam first, because there's no problem of putting on Rabenu Tam before Rashi. And he even brings down a Ben Ishchai that you could put on Rabenu Tam at home, walk to Shul, and then in Shul put on Rashi. Although the Arizal says that you should not wear Rabenu Tam first, he meant don't wear them while saying Shema and Amidah. But there's no problem essentially with putting on, if a person knows that he won't be able to put Rabenu Tam on later, he'll put Rabenu Tam at home, say Shema, and then he'll go daven in Shul regularly. There's no problem with doing that. But no bracha, of course, no bracha. You never make a bracha on Rabenu Tam. Right, he says it comes out that he says you're going to have to put on the Rabenu Tam first. Obviously, this is only talking about people that wear them one after another, but the holy people that wear both of them at once, I don't want to call anybody out. I'm recording, come on, man. The people that wear them both at once, they don't have this conversation regarding them because they're already wearing both at once. Okay, a person, he says, should not put both tefillin in one bag. Why? He says, you have to put two separate bags. Why? Even though you could tell a difference, he says, since one of them halachically is not called tefillin, we know you're not allowed to put anything that's not sacred in your tefillin bag. You cannot put money in your tefillin bag. You cannot put a mirror in your tefillin bag. It has to be just your tefillin. Right? That's why he says we have two separate bags, one for Rashi, one for Rabenu Tam, because since Rabenu Tam since one of the pairs of tefillin is chol, so therefore we don't put them with each other. You also have to make a siman. He says obviously that you won't confuse, putting Rashi in the Rabenu Tam bag and then you get into a whole mess, right? If he says when you bought the bag, you had intention that you want it to be for both, that's like you made a stipulation that you could put things inside and that would be mutar. Likewise, he says you can put both bags of tefillin in your big talit bag. Why? Because your big talit bag wasn't intended only for holy things. It was meant to carry, your talit. It was meant to carry your other items as well. Therefore, you could put both your tefillin bags in your one big talit bag. He says, "En la'asot simanim shel otiyot begufan shel tefillin akir ben Rashi and shel Rabenu Tam." He says you should not make, people would brand their tefillin. Don't brand your tefillin on the set of tefillin to tell you which one's Rashi, which one's Rabenu Tam. Interesting. It looks like people would mark their actual tefillin. He says rather what you do is usually we get Rashi that are a little bit bigger and Rabenu Tam with straps a little narrower. And like that he says people know which tefillin is which. Okay, Bezrat Hashem, one last halakha and we'll continue tomorrow. He says, somebody who he's saying the two parashot of Kriyat Shema afterwards, after davening with his Rabenu Tam, and he ends up hearing Kaddish, Kiddusha, Baruch Hu, be'emtza pasuk Shema Yisrael. Generally, we say if you're saying the pasuk of Shema Yisrael, you don't stop for anything. Right? The first pasuk of Shema Yisrael with Baruch Shem, you don't stop for anything. No Kaddish, no Kiddusha, no Baruch Hu, no nothing. But since he says you're not saying Kriyat Shema now b'turat chiyuv, you're only saying it like you're reading because you're wearing the tefillin, you're going to stop even in the first pasuk. Because again, you're not saying this Kriyat Shema as an obligation. You're saying it just because you put on your Rabenu Tam and you want to say two parashiyot. Therefore, you would stop wherever you are. Even in the first pasuk, you're saying Shema Yisrael, you would stop right there and answer Kaddish, Kiddusha, Baruch Hu, Yishmer Rabbah, whatever you have to answer. Like the Halachot generally says.